I was 63 years old when my son told me I had to leave. I had $22 in my wallet, a bad left knee from 40 years of carpentry work, and no idea where I was going to sleep that night. What Wade didn't understand, what I wouldn't fully piece together until months later, was that he had been quietly draining my savings account for nearly 2 years. He thought the hard work was already finished. He was wrong about that. The house had been Colette's, not in the way people say things belong to whoever uses them most. It had been hers legally, paid for through her own parents' estate, and when she passed from cancer 18 months before, she left it to me in a will that was clear, witnessed, and notarized by a lawyer in town. I had lived in that house for 26 years. I had repaired the roof twice. I had built the back deck with my own hands the summer our youngest grandchild was born. I knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway and which window stuck in July. Wade and his wife Cynthia had moved in 9 months after Colette passed, to help, they said. I was still grieving and hadn't figured out how to cook a proper meal for one, so I didn't question it. I should have questioned it. He came to me on a Thursday afternoon in early November. Cynthia stood in the kitchen doorway behind him, holding a mug of tea she didn't drink from. "There's a problem with Mom's estate," Wade said. He didn't sit down. Her insurance lapsed before she died. The hospital bills came back unpaid. There are debts. I told him Colette had no hospital bills. We were in Ontario. The hospital didn't bill us. He said it wasn't the hospital exactly. There were administrative costs, a care supplement she had enrolled in through a private provider, a lien on the property. Every sentence was slightly different from the last. "You need to be out by this evening," he said. "We need to list the house." I looked at my son. I looked at the man I had coached in minor hockey, the boy I had taught to drive a standard transmission in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire in Renfrew on a quiet Sunday morning. He looked back at me the way you look at something you have already decided to throw away. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. He didn't answer. I went upstairs. I packed what fit into an old canvas duffel. 2 shirts, work pants, my heavy wool toque, my shaving kit, and a photograph of Colette and me taken at our 25th anniversary dinner. I had worn a jacket that didn't quite fit that night. She had laughed at me about it all evening. I kept that photograph in my shirt pocket when I came back downstairs. I took $22 from the change bowl by the front door. Money I had set aside from odd jobs done for a neighbor down the road. Small work, the kind I did to keep my hands busy more than for the income. Wade watched me take it and said nothing. When I stepped onto the porch, the November air in the Ottawa Valley hit me like a wet cloth. The sky was that particular flat gray you only get in eastern Ontario in November, the color that doesn't announce winter is coming. It announces winter has already arrived and has been settled in for some time. I heard the door close behind me. Then the deadbolt turned. Just a small sound. A click. I have thought about that click nearly every day since. I walked for hours. I had lived in Hardwick for over 2 decades, but the town looked different that evening. Smaller, colder, belonging to someone else. Lights were on in the houses I passed. Through one window I saw a family at the dinner table, steam rising from something in a pot, a father pointing at something on the wall while the kids watched with half interest. Normal, ordinary, the kind of thing I hadn't thought to be grateful for when I still had it. My knee was bad by the time I reached the end of the main street. I found a bench outside the municipal office and sat down. The wind came through my jacket as if it weren't there. There was a notice board mounted beside the front door, the kind with a plexiglass cover and a small padlock on the hinge. I wasn't reading it. I was staring at it, because looking at something was better than looking at nothing. Then one notice caught me. It was printed on pale yellow paper, the kind used for law-priority municipal postings. Ontario tax sale, pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001. Several properties listed with outstanding tax arrears. I skimmed past a vacant lot, a strip of swampland nobody wanted, a parcel of scrub bush at the edge of the township. Near the bottom, almost as an afterthought, derelict commercial building, former general store and post office, Lot 14, Concession 7, Township of Horton. Outstanding arrears, 20, auction date, Saturday 9 a.m., Municipal Hall, Hardwick. $20. I reached into my pocket and counted what I had. A 10 two fives and 2 ones, $22. I read the notice 3 more times. Saturday morning was clear and brutally cold, one of those November days in the valley where the sky itself feels like it has frozen solid. There were 8 people at the auction, mostly older farmers in work coats who had come for a parcel of swampland and weren't particularly interested in anything else. The clerk was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She moved through the list without ceremony. When she reached lot 14, she described it flatly. Former general store and post office, derelict, abandoned for approximately 30 years, no services connected, condition as is, minimum bid $20. Nobody raised a hand. I heard 2 of the farmers exchange a look. One of them made a sound, not quite a laugh, but close enough. I raised my hand. The sound from the farmers got slightly louder. The clerk looked up at me over her glasses. $20, I said. My voice didn't shake. I hadn't expected that, but it didn't. She looked around the room. No other bids. She struck the table once with the flat of her pen. It wasn't a gavel, but it had the same effect. I filled out the paperwork with hands that weren't quite steady. I signed my name 3 times. Handed over a 10, 2 fives, and 2 ones. I walked out of that building with $2 in my pocket and a receipt for a piece of property I had never laid eyes on. I walked to it. The building sat at the end of a gravel concession road off Highway 132, set back in a stand of spruce that had grown up around it over the decades, half hiding it from the road. When I pushed through the brush and finally saw it properly, I stopped. It was worse than I had imagined. The roof on the east side had come down entirely, leaving a dark open cavity against the gray sky. The front boards had warped and split until the original storefront shape was barely recognizable. Every window had been broken long ago, the openings plugged with old plywood that someone had nailed up years before, the wood now black with rot. The front step had collapsed inward. Whatever sign had once hung above the door was bleached past reading. I walked around the exterior the way I used to walk a job site, slowly, pressing my hands against walls, getting a sense of what was underneath the visible damage. On the south-facing wall, I pressed my palm flat and felt the resistance there. Solid brick. Old brick, the kind they stopped making 60 years ago, dense and heavy. Underneath the ruin, underneath all the rotted wood and the broken glass and the decades of abandonment, there was something built to last. Carved into the limestone lintel above the door was a date, 1887. Whoever had built this place had built it to outlast themselves by a considerable margin. I stood in the empty doorway in the failing November light and thought about that. The first night was the longest of my life. I found a corner in the back room, the old post office side, where the roof still held. I pulled boards across gaps in the walls to block the wind and lay down on a piece of flattened cardboard I found under a debris pile. My jacket was not enough for that cold. My knee throbbed in a slow, grinding way that didn't stop. At some point I stopped being able to feel my feet properly, which I knew from experience was not something to ignore. I got up and paced the intact section of floor, forcing circulation, even though every step sent a complaint through my bad knee. I thought about Wade, about the way he hadn't been able to look at me when I walked out, about Cynthia in the doorway with her mug of tea, about the house I had repaired and added to over 26 years, every nail I had put into it, every winter morning I had shoveled that front walk before anyone else was awake. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, sitting in the ruins of someone else's abandoned store, I began to cry, not loudly, just tears that came without asking permission, the way they do when you are past managing them. I let them go. There was no one to see. But before morning, something else came. Not hope, I wasn't ready for hope yet, just a decision. A small, cold, stubborn refusal that felt less like optimism and more like the closing of a door. "You've built things before," I said out loud, to the dark, to the walls, to nobody. The walls said nothing back, but they held. I started the next morning with what I could reach. No tools but a short length of rebar I found half buried in the floor. I used it to lever up rotted floorboards, knock out fallen ceiling material, break apart what was beyond saving so what could be saved was easier to find. My hands split along the knuckles by the second day, and I wrapped them in strips torn from an old flour sack. I kept working. On the 4th day, A pickup truck pulled to the edge of the road. The man who got out was in his 70s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a canvas work coat over a wool plaid jacket. He walked to the edge of the property and looked at what I was doing for a long moment before he spoke. "Garnet Holloway," he said, "had the farm up the road for 40 years before my son took it over." I told him my name. He looked at the building, then at my hands. "You've got the right instinct," he said. "Clearing before you fix. Most people skip straight to fixing, and then wonder why nothing holds." He had a truck bed full of salvaged materials, boards from a barn he had taken down over the summer, a box of mixed hardware, 2 good hammers, and a proper pry bar. He said his late wife would have wanted the wood used rather than burned. He also had a thermos of coffee and a paper bag with 2 meat pies from the bakery in town. I hadn't eaten since before the auction. I didn't say that to him. He didn't ask. He just set the bag down on a cleared section of floor and poured 2 cups and handed me one without ceremony. He came back 3 more times that week. He didn't lecture. He worked beside me and showed me things through doing them. How to identify which original timbers could still be sistered and saved. How to cut a brace angle so it would hold under real weight. How to read a wall from the inside to understand what the outside damage meant. He had the manner of a man who had spent his whole life teaching through his hands rather than his voice. "My father built 3 houses, Garnet said one afternoon, fitting a board into a gap. Never drew a plan, just started and kept going until it made sense." "This making sense to you yet?" I asked. He looked around at the space. "Starting to," he said. Wade came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after I had moved in. He pulled up in his SUV and stood at the property line, looking at the building with his hands in his coat pockets. He looked at the work Garnet and I had done, the cleared floor, the braced east wall, the temporary roof section over the back room. "You're actually living here," he said. "I am." He walked closer and reached into his jacket. "I need you to sign something, a quit-claim deed. It transfers any interest you might have in the property on Beechwood Road." "That's Colette's house," I said. "That's my house. There's a legal question around the estate. The simplest thing is for you to sign this and let me handle it." I took the document, read it slowly. It was exactly what he had said, my name, my interest transferred to his. "There's no legal question," I said. "I've read the will, the house is mine. There are debts against it." "Name one," I said. He was quiet for a moment. That silence told me more than anything he might have said. "Wade," I said, "what debts?" He took the document back. His expression went smooth in a way that was somehow worse than anger. "I've been managing your finances," he said. "Since Mom passed, you gave me access to your accounts. I gave you access so you could help me set up the CPP direct deposit once, 2 years ago. You were confused in those months. You still are sometimes. I have documentation of that." He said it calmly, the way someone says something they have rehearsed. "I've been in contact with a doctor who reviewed your case. There's a diagnosis in the file. The power of attorney I filed covers all of this." I never signed a power of attorney. "You don't always remember things clearly," Wade said. "That's part of the condition." The cold that moved through me had nothing to do with November air. He held up a second document, a power of attorney notarized with my name at the bottom. My signature or something close enough to it to pass a glance. He had forged it. I understood that immediately, standing there in the ruins of a building that had been abandoned for 30 years, looking at the handwriting that was supposed to be mine. "Sign the quitclaim," Wade said, "and this stays private. We don't make it complicated." I looked at him for a long time. This man I had taught to drive. This man I had coached through a broken collarbone at 16 and a difficult divorce at 34. This man standing in front of me, explaining calmly how he had arranged for me to disappear. "No," I said. Something moved briefly behind his eyes. "You'll regret this," he said. He got back in his SUV and drove away down the concession road, and I stood alone in the cold listening until the sound of his engine faded completely into the spruce trees. That evening I called Garnet from a payphone at the gas station 2 kilometers down the highway. The next morning he drove me to the Service Ontario office and then to a legal aid clinic in Renfrew. The lawyer there, a woman named Brigitte, was patient and precise, and did not seem surprised by what I described. She said she heard versions of it more than people knew. She pulled up my banking records on her computer. 18 months of statements showed regular small transfers out of my savings, carefully sized amounts, consistent timing, just under the threshold that triggered automatic fraud alerts. My OAS payment notifications had been redirected to an email address I had never seen. In total, nearly $14,000 had moved out of my savings and into an account registered to a numbered company Wade had incorporated the previous year. The power of attorney was a forgery. Bridget identified the copied notary stamp within minutes. It had been lifted from a different document and placed onto this one, and the impression didn't sit flush with the paper the way a genuine stamp did. "This is financial elder abuse," she said, "and it's fraud, more than one kind." The clinic filed a report with the Ontario Provincial Police. A financial crimes investigator made the necessary calls. Wade's access to my accounts was revoked within 72 hours. My CPP and OAS were secured. The investigation was underway. I went back to the building and kept working. The January ice storm came on a Friday night. Garnet and I had spent the previous weeks sealing the main room properly, getting a small wood stove functioning, putting a real temporary roof over the front section. It wasn't warm, exactly, but it was shelter, the kind that holds against weather rather than asking the occupant to hold against it. The freezing rain started around 9 in the evening and was full sheeting ice by 10, turning every surface on the property to glass. I could hear it hitting the metal roof extension Garnet had helped me put up, a sound like static, covering everything. At around 11:30, I heard something that didn't belong to the storm. A low, singular impact, somewhere down the concession road, and then silence where there should have been the continued sound of a car engine. I put on every layer I had and went out. The ice on the gravel was so thick I moved in short, shuffling steps, one hand trailing along the fence posts to keep my footing. 40 meters down the road, I found the car, a family sedan that had drifted sideways on black ice and gone nose-first into the ditch, the front end buried in a frozen bank. The windows were fogged. Inside were 3 people, a woman, somewhere in her mid-40s, conscious but barely moving, a man working one-handed at his door, a cut on his forehead leaking steadily, a girl in the back seat, young, maybe 9 or 10 years old, wide awake and completely silent, the silence of a child frightened past the point of making sound. I got the passenger door open against the ice. "My place is just up the road," I said. "Can you walk?" The man, Kurt, had hit the steering wheel hard, but he could stand. His wife, Tara, had struck her shoulder against the door pillar and was moving carefully. But she was upright. Their daughter, Addie, climbed out on her own and took my hand without being asked, her small, cold fingers closing around mine, and we walked back through the freezing rain toward the light I had left burning in the east window of the building. I got the wood stove burning high. I had 2 extra blankets Garnet had brought over the previous week, still in their plastic. I made tea on the camp stove and kept pressure on Kurt's forehead cut, while I talked to Addie to give her something to listen to besides her parents' pain. I told her about the building, what it had been, what I was making it into. She asked if it used to sell candy when it was a general store. I told her it probably had when her grandparents were young. "It doesn't look like a store," she said. "Not yet," I said. She looked at the exposed brick walls, the original beam running the length of the ceiling, the new floor section Garnet and I had laid. "What's it going to look like?" "Something people can come to when they need to," I said. She nodded slowly, the way children do when they have decided to take you seriously. Then she wrapped her blanket tighter and rested her head against her mother's arm, and the wood stove ticked quietly, and outside the ice storm continued to make the world into glass. Tara cried when she was warm enough to cry. She held Kurt's hand and said thank you several times, not quite directed at me, more at the air, at whatever combination of chance and stubbornness had put a lit lamp in a window on a dark concession road on the worst night in a year. "Thank you, Arnold," Kurt said, when the words finally came to him. Just that. It was enough. Word moves through small towns the way it always has. By the following week, people I didn't know had driven out to look at the building, and some of them brought things. a box of tools, a window sash that fit the east opening almost exactly, 2 bags of cement someone had stored in a garage and never used. A retired electrician named Anton came out, checked the old wiring, identified what had to come out, and filed for a permit on my behalf without being asked. Garnett told me, one afternoon, what people had been saying at the Hardwick Legion. 30 years, he said. People drove past this building and it didn't register. Now they drive past and there's a light on. That changes something, even for people who can't explain what. The OPP investigator called me in February. They had matched Wade's handwriting on the power of attorney application. They had tracked the transfers out of my savings through the numbered company. They had found records showing my OAS notification emails had been redirected 11 months before I had any awareness of it. Wade was charged with fraud over $5,000, forgery, and financial exploitation. Cynthia was charged as a party to 2 counts. I was working on the east window frame when my lawyer called to give me the outcome. I put the phone away and kept fitting the frame. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was closer to the way a room feels when something heavy that has been sitting in the wrong place for a long time is finally moved. A kind of spaciousness, quiet and unfamiliar and clean. The building was registered as a community space through the township that spring. Heritage designation came through in April. The main room became a gathering place, community meetings, a weekly card game for older residents, the occasional potluck. The back room became a workshop, open to anyone who wanted to learn a trade. I ran Saturday morning sessions in basic carpentry. Sometimes a dozen people came, sometimes 2. I didn't mind either way. Addie came back in the summer with her parents. She walked slowly through the front room, touching the brick wall, the old wooden counter I had cleaned and refinished, the pressed tin ceiling tiles I had managed to restore in the front section. It looks like somewhere now, she said. What kind of somewhere? I asked. She thought about it seriously, the way she had thought about everything that night, in January. Somewhere people go on purpose, she said. I kept a lamp burning in the east window most evenings. It had started as practical. I was often working after dark, and then it became something else without my deciding. People told me they had seen it from the highway on winter evenings, passing at speed, and that it had registered somewhere in the back of their minds as a fixed point, a reference. Proof that something was lit and attended out there, in the dark. People sometimes ask what I would have done differently. I don't have a clean answer. I couldn't have known what Wade was doing with my accounts. I couldn't have anticipated the forged documents. There weren't obvious moments where a different choice would have prevented it. But there are things I would do sooner. I would make the calls faster, to the legal aid clinic, to the financial investigator, to anyone with the tools to look at what was being done and name it properly. I was a tradesman for 4 decades. We learned to figure things out alone or not at all. That habit works fine when the problem is a joist or a failed foundation. It works against you when the problem is someone quietly dismantling your life from the inside. What I know now that I didn't know in November, being present in a community is a form of protection, not because the world owes you safety for being decent. It doesn't, but because when people have seen you, when they know you, when they have some small stake in whether you are there or not, it becomes very difficult for anyone to quietly erase you. Wade had counted on my being alone. He had counted on the distance that grief makes around a person. He had counted on my reluctance to make noise about what happened inside a family. He had miscalculated, not because I am remarkable, but because a lamp left burning in a window is harder to put out than it looks when the right people can see it from the road. Find the thing that has been left to rot, the thing everyone said was worthless, too far gone, not worth the effort. Put your hands on it, press your palm flat against the wall, and feel what is underneath the damage. You may find that whoever built it to last longer than anyone expected. Then light something and leave it burning.